What if I told you that the plumbing industry has been quietly working overtime to keep you away from a solution that costs less than a coffee at your favorite cafe? Here's the thing. Nobody wants you to know about those expensive drain cleaners lining the shelves of every hardware store in America. They're not really solving your problem. They're just masking it and making sure you come back for more. Your drain is probably getting worse right now. That slow gurgling sound every time you run the shower, the water backing up, that smell coming from under the sink, all of it points to one simple reality that the cleaning industry desperately wants to remain hidden in plain sight. There's a solution sitting in your kitchen cabinet, and it costs almost nothing. But before we get into how to use this forgotten trick, let me show you why it actually works and why people in the plumbing business would prefer you never discover it. Imagine this. Picture your pipes right now, deep inside your walls and beneath your floors. Over months and years, they're not just collecting water, they're collecting everything. Grease from dinner, hair, soap residue, dead skin cells, mineral deposits. It all builds up in layers like geological sediment until the water path becomes narrow. And narrow paths create problems. The chemical companies want you to believe that the only answer is a strong corrosive formula that burns through everything with aggressive power. They show you advertisements with drain pipes surrounded by flames, suggesting that you need something violent and dangerous to fix a simple problem. But here's where the real secret starts to emerge. You don't need violence to solve this. You need chemistry. Generations ago, long before drain cleaners became a profitable industry, people solved this problem without spending a dime. In farmhouses across rural America, in tenement buildings in crowded cities, in cottages throughout small towns, families kept their drains flowing with ingredients that cost pennies. And they didn't do it by accident. They did it because it worked consistently and safely for decades. The ingredient most people reference is baking soda. But here's where almost everyone gets the story wrong. Baking soda alone isn't the secret. The real magic happens when baking soda meets an ordinary household ingredient that you probably also have on a shelf right now, white vinegar. And what happens when they meet is genuinely remarkable. When baking soda enters your drain, it begins to settle into the accumulated buildup. It's porous, slightly abrasive, and it starts to interact with the layer of grease and residue that's choking your pipes. Then, when white vinegar, an acid, meets the baking soda, a base, something shifts at the molecular level. The reaction creates carbon dioxide. And that's where the work actually begins. Picture what's happening inside your drain right now. Imagine that fizzing, bubbling reaction spreading through the clogged material. The bubbles aren't just making noise. They're physically loosening the layers of buildup. Soap scum starts separating. Grease begins breaking down. Hair gets dislodged. The organic material that's been clinging to your pipe walls starts to release its grip. And hot water, which you'll use next, has a much easier time carrying everything away. This is why the reaction is so satisfying to watch and hear. But also why so many people do it completely wrong and then blame the method for not working. Most people dump random amounts of both ingredients down their drain, creating this massive volcanic eruption, thinking more reaction equals better results. They're not just wrong, they're actually wasting the ingredients and the opportunity. The balance sheet backs up the patient's argument too. Roughly $1.5 billion in cash and short-term investments. No debt problem to speak of. And operating cash flow for the first half of the year actually rose from about $456 million to $545 million, even as reported profit fell. That's a meaningful detail. When cash generation improves while net income declines, it usually means some of that profit drop is coming from non-cash or timing items, not from the core business actually burning through cash. So what would move this thesis in either direction from here? If third quarter results land at the low end of guidance, or worse, and management's tone shifts from, and we're fixing execution, to something more defensive. That's the bear case, solidifying into something structural. If instead international and connected TV growth keep accelerating and start meaningfully offsetting weakness in the core U.S. business, or if expense growth finally slows next quarter, that supports the idea that this was a transition period rather than the start of a longer decline. On valuation, I want to be careful here, because a falling stock price on its own proves nothing. After this drop, the trade desk trades at a forward earnings multiple in the high single digits to low double digits, a steep discount to where it traded a year ago and below the broader ad tech industry average. That looks cheap relative to its own history, but cheap only means something if the earnings underneath it hold steady. If next year's estimates get revised down again, which is a real possibility given how far this guide missed, that cheap multiple could look a lot less attractive in hindsight. The market isn't pricing this like a broken company. It's pricing in genuine uncertainty about whether growth ever returns to anything close to its old pace. So where does that leave things? This isn't a company in existential trouble. The balance sheet, the retention numbers, and the cash generation don't support that red. But the growth premium that used to justify a rich valuation has been substantially stripped away, and the guidance suggests that's not changing next quarter either. The bull case depends on newer growth areas eventually outweighing softness in the legacy business. The bear case depends on this being a structural share loss problem, but not a temporary stumble. Right now, there isn't enough evidence to say definitively which one wins, and I'd be skeptical of anyone claiming certainty either way, myself included. What I'd actually watch over the next couple of quarters, whether the guidance for the following quarter stabilizes or deteriorates further, and whether management shows any real sign of slowing expense growth to match the current environment. Those two things will tell you more than any single earnings reaction ever could. So here's what I'm sitting with. When a company's entire valuation story is built on consistent double-digit growth, and that growth stalls, even temporarily, how much of the old premium should investors still be willing to pay? And at what point does a temporary slowdown stop being temporary? I don't think there's a clean answer. Curious where you land on it. So the next time your sink starts draining slower than usual before you head to the store, before you pick up that $30 bottle of industrial drain cleaner, stop and think about what you actually have at home. Baking soda and white vinegar. That's it. Combine them in the right proportions, follow the method correctly, and you might find that your drain clears right up without spending money you don't need to spend, and without introducing harsh chemicals into your home. And if it doesn't work, if the drain is still slow, or if it's clearly a deeper problem, then yes, it's time to call a professional or get the right equipment. But why jump straight to that expensive step when you could spend $3 first? Here's what actually surprises people once they try this. It works so often that they start asking themselves why they didn't try it years ago. They start noticing that a lot of the problems they've been taught to solve with expensive commercial products actually have cheaper, simpler alternatives sitting right there in their homes. It changes how they think about their entire house, about cleaning, about maintenance, about how they've been conditioned to view every problem as something that needs a specialized commercial solution. This is the kind of practical knowledge that Secret Vault exists to explore. Not to tell you that you should never trust any commercial products, but to show you that sometimes the solution you've been sold isn't actually better than what your ancestors figured out decades or centuries ago. Sometimes it's just more profitable. The next time you're facing a slow drain, before you assume you need something expensive or dangerous, check your kitchen cabinet. Because sometimes the answer isn't hiding in a store, it's been sitting there waiting for you all along.